Hello, I'm Jack Titchener. Welcome to a special summertime overtime edition of Illinois Lawmakers. We're here at the Illinois Capitol with Public Radio State House Bureau Chief Amanda Vinicky. It has been a combative week here at the Capitol. Lots of back and forth between Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan, and the majority Democrats at the end of the day before the House went home passed a 1-month operating budget for the state of Illinois, which the fate is uncertain.
The fate is uncertain. Democrats say that this is something that will protect the most vulnerable populations. That's why they did it. However, it's not just that. They've added on, since there was a lot of political hay made over state employees potentially not getting their own paychecks, that's been added into this measure as well. If you'll remember, the Illinois House did take an initial try. It failed, so tried two. It won with these state employee paychecks. And that perhaps presents a bit of a political pickle for Governor Bruce Rauner, because he has said that he will do all he can to make sure that employees get paid. At the same time, he has been vocal about saying he does not like a temporary budget. He believes that that's unconstitutional. So what does he do? Does he veto the whole thing if it gets to him? Still has to go back to the Senate, but presumably that'll go forward, get to his desk. Does he veto the whole thing? Does he veto only a portion of it? Say, veto out all of the spending on state services, but leave in employees' paychecks? But what does that make him look like? Already, Democrats have said, we basically dare you to do that. It would look like you're helping out workers, but hurting poor people, the disabled, the elderly. And
this is coming in light of some conflicting court opinions. One judge in Cook County is saying you can't pay anybody. You don't have the budgetary authority. A judge down in Southern Illinois in St. Clair County is saying you have collective bargaining agreements. Everybody needs to be paid.
And I am no attorney, but I think this is one that presumably lawyers will also themselves be trying to figure out what to make of, since you have these two apparently conflicting decisions. We're waiting to hear. It seems like the Attorney General's office is going to appeal the decision that says employees can be paid. On the other hand, you have the people who lost in court, so the comptroller saying that she's going to appeal the decision in Cook County that said she wouldn't be able to write those paychecks. So basically we have one big mess with this bill on the side and on top of it.
We're going to need to get a big whiteboard up here to diagram this thing before it's all over. But at the same time, the level of rancor here in the House, I've been doing this 25 years, and I haven't heard quite the name-calling that I heard today in the House chambers back and forth. The Republicans wanted to run the governor's version of paying those employees by doing what's called a continuing spending resolution. Democrats said, you're out of order. We're not even going to hear it.
Exactly. So, Jack, you do hear these battles from time to time. Of course, it's partisan, it's politics. You're going to have that. But it's how often they say it, and it's that it rises to the top levels, that you're having the governor of a state make accusations against a top-level legislator, and then that flows down. So I think part of it, too, is nobody has any answers of when or how is this going to end. And so that makes the animosity raise even higher.
Well, the Democrats in the House are saying, well, we're not seeing anything specific from the governor, so we run what we say are versions of it. The governor says these are sham hearings. A lot of his staff, they're not even appearing before committee hearings now. And I asked Speaker Madigan, I said, well, are you thinking about issuing subpoenas to get them to go?
And he said, we've thought about it. I mean, think about that. The last time that I can recall subpoenas being issued was in the Blagojevich area, when it got to true, potential criminal activity, not just a subpoena to issue to a governor. But that said, you also don't have an executive branch not showing up at committee hearings. That's just standard practice in the state of Illinois. You may not want to, you may not like what goes on there, but you show up. It's the three branches of government.
There's a lot of frustration on the floor here, and I'm sure over in the Senate too, about the individual lawmakers would like to see something get done because programs and people back in their districts are being hurt. But at the same time, the leadership on both sides of the aisle in the governor's office are so deeply dug in. They're dug in like ticks on this. They're not budging, although they say they're talking.
They say that they're talking, but it doesn't seem like they're talking a ton. You go back to history, and when a deal is really near, they're meeting all the time, talking consistently. But we don't know, of course, what goes on behind closed doors. Neither the governor or Speaker Madigan really talk about that. But it is clear that, at least publicly, they remain very divided. And you heard the speaker, in fact, say this could go into the fall.
I did hear that.
Yeah. So take note of that. I think that shows where we're at. Just those four letters: fall, eek.
Not anytime soon.
Nope.
No question about it. Amanda Vinicky, thanks so much for your time and your insights here on Illinois Lawmakers. Always a pleasure. Up next, we'll have a conversation with two veteran House members who are in the thick of this week's action here at the state capitol. Joining me now on Illinois Lawmakers, Deputy House Majority Leader Lou Lang, Democrat of Skokie, and Deputy House Republican Leader Patty Bellock of Hinsdale. One of the more hard-fought days I've seen here on the floor of the Illinois House of Representatives over the past 25 years that I've been coming here. This all comes down to passing a temporary one-month budget to keep state employees paid. That was the amendment that came to the floor today. It passed on a party line vote. The Republicans stayed away from it. Representative Lang, you were one of the chief spokesmen on the bill today.
When this bill came from the Senate, it was a one-month budget to pay for essential services, things that we absolutely have to pay for in the state of Illinois. In the fullness of time, and because the governor talked about paying state employees, we added an amendment to the bill to pay state employees for the month of July, to give us an opportunity to continue to have reasonable conversations with both sides of the aisle and both chambers to try to come to some agreement. We don't want the state employees not to be paid. As you know, there was a court case.
There's several at the moment.
Several court cases, of course, and the Cook County Court and then the Cook County Appellate Court ruled that we could not pay state employees except for a list that they created of things that deal with consent decrees, et cetera. But basically 97% of state employees were not going to get paid. We wanted to take care of that today.
And we're just hearing word that a court in St. Clair County has said that the Comptroller's office has the ability now to start cutting paychecks. So you got two different court opinions, and it's not clear, despite what was said on the floor today, how the governor is going to deal with this thing if it actually makes it to his desk. Republicans in the House, led by on the floor your colleague from the Jacksonville area, C.D. Davidsmeyer, he wanted to go along with what the governor was putting out on the table to get folks paid, and that was a continuing resolution.
Right. What C.D. Davidson wanted was a continuing resolution in order to pay the state workers, because, of course, we all care about paying the state workers, and that was their thought on a way to go forward with that, because they think that the governor is going to veto the entire bill that came forward today. So that was a thought as to how to address the serious concern of the continuing appropriation for state workers.
Well, it's pretty self-evident what the House Democrats did today. That's a one-month temporary budget. Right. Make sure people get paid. What's a continuing resolution do?
Well, the continuing resolution is what they had done for the lawmakers, that they would continue to get paid. And so we felt that because it was done for lawmakers last year, that that be something that could be done for state employees because they're so important to the state.
And that motion was ruled out of order. House Democrats did not approve of the idea. What was your main objection to it, Representative Lang?
Well, the problem, as stated by Representative Bellock, is twofold. First, if you pass a bill that allows state employees to just get paid forever when you don't have a budget, it takes all the pressure off, or much of the pressure off, the members of the House and Senate to actually finish the budget process. That will hurt regular, ordinary people, middle-class people, people with epilepsy or autism, people that need the help of the state of Illinois. Additionally, Representative Bellock just indicated that one of the reasons they voted no is the governor said he would veto it. I believe that's an abdication of our responsibilities under the Constitution. The governor may veto or not veto, but we have a responsibility to vote for bills up or down based on how we feel about that particular public policy, not how the governor feels or not what the governor's plans are. If the governor chooses to veto a bill that will pay the state employees for the month of July and fund essential services for the month of July, so be it. He'll do it.
Well, I'd like to respond to that in that we felt the way that we don't agree with the temporary budget anyways, because we feel that that's just going to push off. Like in the Blagojevich years, it went from 1 month to the next month to the next month. And then we feel it's out of balance because we feel that that goes along with the $4 billion extra in the original budget spending plan that the Democrats passed. So that was one of the reasons, the concerns that we had, that it wouldn't drive people to the table. The whole reason here for us being here is to come to a bipartisan balanced budget. And we would like to get to that as soon as we could to take care of the most underprivileged people in the state workers, and everybody that needs to get paid.
But you're not going to get to that bipartisan agreement if you put the safety valve in of paying all the state employees all at once and say, we never have to address this issue again. Pretty soon there's not much left to debate about except taking care of the most vulnerable people in Illinois.
To be fair, it didn't sound like after hearing the way the shots were going back and forth across the floor today, and everybody was taking part, both of you included. I don't see that you're any closer now. You're talking about coming to the table. Representative Tryon talked about coming to the table. Representative Davis here on the Democrat side talked about coming to the table. You are so far apart on what the governor's turnaround agenda is that he insists upon be a part of the final budget of the state of Illinois.
I'd like to comment on that. I agree. We are further apart than I think we were 2 months ago. But I wish then that we had followed the regular budget process that we have followed for the last several years, coming to a resolution on what the general revenue was of the state, and then working in our appropriation committees. We are farther apart now, and the only one that will suffer from this is for all the taxpayers of Illinois who are demanding that we get over the bipartisan tug-of-war and come to a solution. And by extending this on a month-to-month, I don't think that will drive people to the table, especially the leaders, to make the final decisions that we encourage them to do.
The reason that we're as far apart as we are is that the governor has insisted on a long list of a political agenda that has nothing whatsoever to do with the budget, holding the budget hostage. He said, I will not debate the budget with you. I will not negotiate the budget with you until you take care of these 10 political items for me. And what he's doing is holding the budget hostage and the people that depend on it.
I'd like to respond too.
Okay,
I'm going to respond to that in that the reason this governor was elected by both Democrats and Republicans is that people are tired of the status quo in Illinois. The fiscal crisis that's existed for the last several years, they want the reforms, and this governor ran on those projections that he would try to get some reforms. Even though he is open to revenues, he wants to get some reforms in place because that is why the people of the state elected him.
And let's not forget that there was a budget passed out of both chambers and put on his desk. And we said it was a spending plan, and we said it was a little short on revenue, and we wanted to work on that. But the governor, under the Constitution of the state of Illinois, didn't have to veto the budget. He could have shaped that budget any way he wanted by A, not spending all the money in that spending plan, or B, doing reduction vetoes, which is his responsibility. It's a tool he has to use. So we don't have to be here today. The governor could have made that budget look any way he wanted to look, and the state of Illinois would still be open for business, state employees would be paid, and we wouldn't be debating these issues today.
Why did he not do that?
Okay, my comment is that we were in the middle of some budget negotiations in working committees, both in the appropriate committees and in the smaller working committees, when all of a sudden on that one day, that budget bill came out, didn't even go through committee, came directly to the floor with no input from either side at that point, maybe from your side, but we hadn't even seen it. That was directly in opposition to the entire budget process. So, and I will clarify, it was passed by one side of the aisle, not passed by both sides of the aisle.
This may explain why Republicans in the House and Senate opposed it. It does not explain why the governor didn't use the power given him under the Constitution. He could have taken our budget as we put it on his desk and made it look exactly like the out-of-balance sham budget he proposed in February. He could have done that, but he chose to send it back here so that he can continue to work on his political agenda.
So here we are now, and it's been intimated that he won't sign it. It's also been said on the floor that he's going to veto it. He could mandatorily veto it. He could do a number of different things to this. He could also just not do anything, and it expires when the month is over.
Right, and I just want to explain that when he introduced his budget, he did have $1 billion worth of cuts in that budget. He had the pension bill in there the other pension bill was ruled unconstitutional. But the spending plan that was passed by the Democrats in the legislature a couple of months ago did not have any revenue whatsoever in it. It was strictly spending, so it did not address balanced budget at all.
Well, this week he opened the door for more revenue in a couple of different ways. But on the second floor, when you talked to reporters yesterday, he said if the speaker won't pass his reforms with the Democrats on board, then the speaker should try to pass a tax increase to fund that budget. That's $4 billion short of what it needs.
We've been saying all spring that to get a balanced budget that properly takes care of the needs of the people of our state and properly reflects our values, that we need both cuts and revenue. We had $800 million in cuts in the budget bills that went to the governor. We said we need more revenue. We said we want to talk about it. The governor says, sure, I'll talk to you about it. Just do these 10 political items, and as soon as you do those, we'll take care of this for you.
Representative Lang, Representative Bellick, thanks very much. We appreciate your time on this edition of Illinois Lawmakers. We'll be back next week to talk more about this, no doubt about it. Up next on the program, we'll hear about how this budget, or lack thereof, is hitting home around the state of Illinois. How is the lack of a state budget hitting home across the state of Illinois? For that, we turn to Democratic State Representative Mary Flowers of Chicago and Republican State Senator Jason Barickman of Bloomington. Good to have you both on the program today.
Thanks, Jack.
Good to see you.
With the exception of elementary and secondary education, the appropriations bills authorizing the state to spend money have all been vetoed by the governor. So there's really no framework right now for the controller to cut checks for a lot of things. So a lot of people are in a world of hurt. In your district in the city of Chicago, Representative Flowers, what are you hearing from the groups and people there about how this is hitting home?
Well, I was at Operation Push on Saturday, and a lot of telephone calls were coming in about not being able to get their prescription drugs. And as a result, people were wondering what is it that they should do. Not only that, a lot of people are saying that the governor really needs to walk a mile in their shoes to see what it's like to be indigent, to see what it's like to be living in poverty, to know what it's like to need daycare, to be working 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. And until such time that he walk a mile in their shoes, he should really get off their backs and try to balance the budget some other way.
Senator Barickman, your district runs from Bloomington all the way over to the Indiana border. A lot of the same programs, of course, are in place there. What are you hearing from the folks back home?
Yeah, I represent a university and some 80 to 90 different communities. We have social service providers throughout the district I represent. And I think definitely, people feel the need for Illinois to come to solutions, but they also recognize that these are problems that we've known existed for several years. For years we've seen the state of Illinois spending more money than it takes in. The result of that means there's delayed payments to our universities and others. And many of us who have voted against those prior budgets have said the day of reckoning will come when Illinois will need to live within its means. I think that day is today. Governor Rauner has been very clear that we need to operate under a balanced budget. We can no longer spend more money than we're taking in.
And the budget that the Democrats passed out of the House and Senate was still about $4 billion short on the revenue side when it came to funding the programs.
We was probably about $4 billion short on one side. The governor's budget was short on his side. The fact of the matter is, we sent the governor a budget. If he wanted that budget to be balanced even more, he has the power of the pen. All he had to do was do a line item veto. It wouldn't have been any problems at all. Yes, we knew the day of reckoning would come because there was no jobs being created here in the state of Illinois. We also knew the day of reckoning would come because people were not being educated, they were being incarcerated. So when you look at the incarceration as far as being a burden on the state, and education bringing revenues in.
At the moment, there are a number of different legal strategies being attempted by the governor's office and the comptroller's office. The attorney general's office is also involved in this. At the moment, it doesn't look like anyone but what are called essential state employees will get a paycheck on July 15th. What are the implications?
Well, we don't know yet whether or not that's true. I certainly believe that state employees who show up for work ought to be paid. I think the governor's been very clear in his opinion that that's true as well. He thinks those employees should be paid. But there's no doubt this budget stalemate that we have is resulting in a frustrating time for many of our state employees and for all those who rely on the state for those precious tax dollars that we have. We need to come to a solution. I think that's very clear. But for all the cries that Speaker Madigan and his allies have made for tax increases, maybe the time is now for them to put their actions where their mouths are. Representative Flowers is correct. The legislature passed a budget. It was a partisan roll call. That budget spent $4 billion that we don't have. If they really feel that we should have a balanced budget, the budget they put forward ought to include a tax increase. Why not now with the supermajority control that Speaker Madigan has, why not now put their votes on a tax increase?
That was basically the challenge issued by the governor yesterday on the second floor as he talked to reporters. Mr. Madigan, Mr. Speaker, you've got the 71 votes to pass a tax increase. If you're not going to go along with my reforms at all, then pony up and pass that thing.
Well, I haven't had the conversation with the speaker yet, but the fact of the matter is, the governor does not have to present a challenge to the speaker. We know exactly what it is that we need to do. But this is just not a democratic process. We have the governor, we have the Republicans, and we have the Democrats. We're supposed to work together. If we send the governor a budget, as he's done before, he will either not sign it or veto it or pick and choose whatever it is that he wants to do. So we still need to sit down at the table and talk and have a real discussion, because we're talking about people's lives here. And just to have a few people to get their paycheck, what about the rest of the state? Already the state is at bare bones. When you think about people who's going to be depending on CETA to get their lights and gas on, there's 250 people that's already been laid off with federal funds. This has nothing to do with state funds. Why are these people being laid off? Why hasn't the governor sent CETA their money so they could at least provide for the heat in the wintertime and the air conditioning in the summertime?
Senator, there are literally dozens of programs that operate out of local offices all over the state of Illinois, and the agency or the group or the association that represents them said they estimate some 1,500 employees have already been laid off because of the uncertainty over this budget situation, and that's one thing, but the 1,500 workers represent, points of contact for thousands more needy, elderly, young people.
So, these are the problems that exist, and I think the problems are apparent to all of us throughout the state, or hopefully they are. The question is, what is the solution? And I think Governor Rauner's been very clear that he believes this stalemate that we're in can be solved through a combination of cuts to the budget, revenue increases that he said he'll support so long as we adopt the reforms that are needed to see Illinois' economy grow. Now, if Speaker Madigan and his allies have alternative solutions other than simply spending more money, we're all ears. But to this point, all we've heard from the Democrats is the fact that they want to spend $4 billion that we don't have, and they want Republicans to adopt a tax increase without adopting the reforms that Republicans want.
Here's where we're at a stalemate. Speaker Madigan says by changing the workers' compensation plan for the state of Illinois for injured workers, all these things are basically against the core beliefs of Democrats. The governor, for his part, says, well, raising taxes is against my core beliefs. So it looks like irresistible force meets immovable object here.
Well, somebody should tell the governor a few things. Tell him that the Supreme Court rules that the pension has to stay in place. That's number one. The governor also needs to know that there was tort reform. The Supreme Court said there can be no tort reform. So those two items should be taken off the table. In regards to workman's comp, we're talking about injured workers. But if the governor really wants to do something, when I was invited to the mansion, I gave the governor some ideas. I asked him to invite his corporate people to the table, and let's talk how we can all raise revenue, because the corporate people need the working people to go to work every day. See, the trains need to run, the buses need to run, the workers need to be able to get to work for the corporation. Until such time that we do something about bringing more revenue into the state with a transaction financial tax and other means, we will always have the stalemate that we are having right now.
Barrickman some time.
And I don't want to belabor that. The courts have not ruled on any lawsuit reforms proposed by Governor Rauner. But I don't want to dwell on that, though. I guess my point is this. For so long, the state of Illinois has operated, and the government of Illinois, through its political leaders, has operated in these one-year budget cycles. And in that simple context, it's easy to talk about the fact that the only way to solve a budget crisis is through cuts or raises in revenue, tax increases. Republicans have a third idea. We think that in the big picture, we can allow the Illinois economy to grow so long as we adopt some of those reforms that allow job creators, businesses, and others to bring jobs to Illinois. Workers' compensation reform, we continue to support the workers' comp system. We simply think it ought to be limited only to those employees who are hurt on the job rather than the abuse that you see in the current system.
Is there room for compromise in that, Representative
Grow
Flowers?
the economy off the backs of poor people. The federal government has bailed the corporations out. The federal government has bailed the banks out. There's nothing else that poor, working, indigent, autistic, incapacitated people can do. There's nothing else left. We need to grow revenue. And the only way, there's some corporations that's not paying their fair share of taxes.
And
there
we're
are
out,
other
and we're out of
businesses.
time. Thank you both, Representative Flowers, Senator Barackman. Good to have you on the program. That's it for this week's special coverage of the summer overtime session of the Illinois General Assembly. We'll be back next week when lawmakers return to the Capitol.